Howdy doody howdies of the duties. So what I'm going to do today is, if you can't see from here and from over there, I'm going to whittle me a Tonberry out of soap. Now you might say you look like you're pretty close to being done. I'm not. I'm not close to being done, not by a long shot. But hey, it is what it is. I'm going to check my audio levels here. Okay, cool. We're good. Okay, maybe later. Go over there. Do that. Okay. I don't actually need the headphones on. I just needed to. I just put them on because why not? Okay. So I do have. Where did I put it? I do have a block of wood that I've been very slowly working on because originally it used to look like this. So it was roughly twice the size. The other half is over here. So, like I got down to the point where I could just like twist that bad boy in half. But right now, I'm just working on soap. This was an idea that somebody had on like Reddit, I think it was. Yeah, it was on Reddit. And I was like, you know what? That's a good idea. I should do some soap. Problem is that it smells terrible. I hate it. I hate the smell so much. But what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to get, and I'm using this. This, I don't know what the hell this is. It came out of, I want to say, like an acne thing where you like maybe push it. I don't know. I've had this thing for like a decade. And I haven't used it really for anything until now. This seems to be just right when it comes to like fine tune, sort of like general scraping. So, like, if you'll notice here, right, on this side, it's a little bit more round. On this side, it's a little bit more concave. So, I'm going to come back around here and I'm going to scrape off a bit of this. All right. And I can come at it any number of ways. I can come at it, just kind of, just like gouge it like that. Or, fortunately, I have the option, if I hold on to it right, I can also get some good scraping going on like that. Me, there it is. So mostly what I'm trying to accomplish here is on his rear, he's got a little bit of like butt. He's got too much of a butt, and I got to get rid of his butt. So I'm gonna kind of work on that right now. See what I can accomplish. Now I wish I had a second camera to show what this looks like. So I've already kind of scraped off just a little bit here. So like, and the lighting is not the best because I don't have a ton of money to make this work. And the reason I'm doing this, the reason I'm kind of like scraping off and making sure he doesn't have his giant butt, and then also kind of like getting rid of the gut that's in here, is because I'm like, I want the way that I see a Tonberry is that they are they're hiding something. They aren't what you think they're going to be. When you see a Tonberry, unless you know what you're dealing with, you might be like, oh, that guy's kind of cute. And then all of a sudden, he's not so cute. And so it's like, well, whoops. And so, yeah, one of the reasons, and this Redditor had mentioned that, using the soaps because it's a moisturizing soap. And so this soap specifically that I purchased, it was like maybe $10 for 8. And again, it smells a smell that I don't like because I don't like most scents, especially things that are added to things. But it's firm enough that you can really kind of cut into it, but it's not. But it's also, or it's soft enough that you can cut into it, but it's firm enough that it won't just like fall apart. It's honestly surprisingly um, dense, and I like that. I like the fact that first try, man. So I'm just kind of scraping off the top of the back of his hood into towards his tail because he's wearing a hood and you can't see back behind him, but you can see that it's hanging off of his tail. And so there's going to be some aspect of, you know, and this isn't done by any means and this is just practice, but like you'll see I've added little crevices behind him or to the side of his tail. And the reason for that is because his hood has to fall somewhere. And you've got to at least indicate that his hood is somewhere. You don't just want his tail and his hood to be exactly the same thing. That's not what they're doing. So I'm scraping off parts of this to just kind of get a bit of the sort of macro material out of the way here. And I'm trying to kind of what I was looking for. I'm trying to even things out, but not to the point of like I'm not trying to be finicky. This is the first piece that I've done so far. I haven't done any more. And so I'm trying to get a feel for the material. I'm trying to get a feel for the techniques that I need to incorporate. And obviously, these are not all going to translate into wood. You know, if I try to start cutting into that wood the same way I'm cutting into this with this piece of metal, not going to happen. It just doesn't happen that way. But part of it is the understanding of the material and the tool that you're working with, how they work together, what you can do with those tools, what you can do with relationship to both the tool and the material. And I feel like having an understanding of what you're working with is a pretty good 101. So that's where I'm going with it. And, of course, I'm like, okay, I want to make a Tonberry. I could be like, let's start with the small shape. I don't want to do that. I want to challenge myself. I want to get an idea of things. And like the fact that I've been able to like create this semblance. Like, sure, he doesn't have any eyes or anything, but I've created a bit of a tail here. I can go a little bit further into detailing when it comes, when it's later. I've got on this side, I've got his lantern already in there, like his knife, and a little bit of the hood and part of the sleeve that's hanging off of his arm. The thing that I'm really bad at is being too perfectionist. And by being too perfectionist, nothing gets done. So, and what I found was rather surprising to me was that during this process, I was not being as perfectionist as I normally would be. And I'm like, hey, it's a good feeling. And it has translated into me enjoying the product of the effort, which is also rare for me. Because, I live in America. America is very much about what you get done. It's not about the doing. It's not about your effort. Oh, you still tried anyway. A lot of it is, well, what did you get for me? What did you do? What did you accomplish? I remember when I was younger. Speaking of Tonberries, I was playing. I'm pretty sure it was Final Fantasy VI, And my mother saw me playing it, and she's like, "Why are they just standing around? What are they doing?" And then, at one point, and she said this many times about things that I was interested in. It's just like, but what do you get when you win? And I never knew how to answer that question because I was a child. And I don't understand how a parent talks to their children like that. But I also just didn't know how to deal with such a question because it wasn't about the question, it was the attitude behind the question. And the attitude was, I don't think what you're doing is worthwhile. And that is a very common thing here in America where the effort must have something, because if you don't have a something, then if you don't have a result for your effort, then your effort was worthless and you should never do it again. And I'm not fond of that. Problem is I repeat it oftentimes to myself, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, of course. And it's a problem. It creates problems in people's lives. People often don't think that they're good enough because of what they're not, what they aren't doing versus what they are doing, etc. And so I'm actually glad that at times, yes, the effort is showing me something is happening here. Something's happening here. But, at the same time, I don't feel as terrible about it. And maybe it's because I'm finally getting something done that is associated with what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't know. That's pretty long-winded. Nobody's here to listen. I'm going to keep doing this anyway. Probably do it for about an hour. It's like, here's a great alternative. Here's a great, alternative perspective of things. So, earlier today, I was playing World of Warcraft. And I was playing on Project Ascension because, no thank you, Blizzard. I'm gonna give you time or money. Do I not have any tags on there? Oh yeah, I got plenty of tags on there. I'm looking at OBS right now, and I was just like, huh? So I was playing Project Ascension, and I was like, what can I do to improve my literally my abilities? More stats, higher stats, more armor, etc. Because I was already max level, and I was having a really hard time in this one dungeon, and I was like, what can I do to accomplish? So I start looking some stuff up online. I find this video, and it's like, hey, do all these PvP stuff. You get all this armor, and then you'll be set for the next stage. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I start doing that, and I'm getting there, but it's taking a while, and I'm getting real frustrated because in this specific version, it's called Area 52. You can pick all of your abilities, all of them. There are no classes. And, I hadn't picked my character to be player versus player. I picked it for, general survivability and the ability to kill a bunch of crap in the world. It's known as player versus everything. And the way that I built my character was not very efficient against the player versus player format, especially because a lot of people in the player versus player format had what they call crowd control abilities, where they can cause you to be stunned or rooted in place and not be able to move. And I was not having fun with that whatsoever. I was getting very frustrated. And I got to the point where I was playing losing streak after, it was a losing streak of 5 or 6 in a row. I was like, all I need is one more. I finally get one, but it wasn't enough because I ran out of point. I was like, I only need 220 points. And I was like, crap, how is this going to go? And then I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my God, the amount of points that we get is just nothing. And then we lost that one anyway. And I'm just like, son of a bitch. And I'm just freaking out. Finally, after basically 6 hours, I want to say, I finally got all the pieces of armor from the player versus player stuff. And I'm like, all right, I'm done. And I'm not doing that no more. So I finished it. And then I went on and played the what's known as the Mana Storm, which is sort of single. It's not necessarily single player, but you can play it single player. It's like a boss run basically, and I was doing it all by myself because that's how I play World of Warcraft. It's always how I've played for the most part. It's very difficult for me to. It's not that I don't play well with others. In general, like I actually prefer to be talking to people right now and having an actual conversation. Just that's not what's happening. But video games, it's easier for me to play by myself because one, people don't rely on me, and that reliance is it's kind of like when. So I have ADHD, and ADHD is a pain in the butt. ADHD is a hell of a drug, to rephrase Rick James in the old Chappelle show. And he said it was cocaine, but I'm saying ADHD. Anyway, and so let's see. I'm looking at this Tonberry because I'm on this side right here with this blade, right? And I'm kind of working right here in this little area. And I already have a little bit of his hood. Because what I've got him going is he's basically lunging forward and stabbing. That's essentially what I've realized is like that's based on the cuts and everything that I've had in the past. And so I'm trying to figure out how best to, like, all I have to do really is just kind of like just follow the line. That's the cool thing about it is like as I continue on in this process, some of the cuts, some of the scrapes, some of the gouges, etc., they just kind of tell you what to do. And you have to kind of follow. You have to listen. You have to pay attention. And so, I'm kind of starting to understand why certain artists say what they say when it comes to their artwork. I'm starting to get it. And I've always wanted to be an artist. It's been a thing that I've always wanted in my life. But to go back to what I was talking about, and the reason why I was even mentioning it in the first place, because I've gone in so many directions right now, is the ADHD waiting mode. And that is, like, if I have something I have to do, like if I have, let's say for instance, I have to be somewhere at 9 o'clock tonight. It is currently 7:48 p.m. If I had to be there at 9 o'clock, I wouldn't be doing anything right now. I wouldn't be doing this for like another 12 minutes and then let myself go to go do the thing or whatever. I'd sit here and basically do nothing and browse the internet and look at the clock every like 30 seconds or whatever, or, put on maybe a last meal, possibly, depending on how long that last meal is, whatever. And I wouldn't do anything. I would simply wait. And that happens, that's because if I have any kind of like obligation, that's what I'm focused on. And so if I have an obligation to other people, I'm focused on it. But it also prevents me from being able to like take a break. It's very often very difficult to take a break when you're like raiding, for instance. And especially in World of Warcraft, it's a lot more fast-paced than, let's say, EverQuest. So I used to play EverQuest quite a bit, and got kind of tired of it after a while. And the guild that I was in ended up merging with another guild, and a lot of people in the other guild just kind of meh. It didn't really get me. It didn't really. I didn't find myself to be as amenable to them and their general approach to the way that raiding was working prior to that. And so I was like, whatever. And so slowly started not really playing as much as before. Well, but in EverQuest, at the very least, there's times where you have to wait a while sometimes. And if you have like 30 people or 40 people or 80 people or 100 people, which did happen, the more people, the more waiting. But also, things would sometimes just kind of start happening. But you're still at least given the opportunity to wait, to kind of take a breath, to take a break. World of Warcraft does not work that way. World of Warcraft is like, here's 5 people, or here's 10 people, or here's like a 12-man group, I think, or like 20 or 40. But like, it's all very much like specifically constructed. Like, people go into these raids and like all of you have very specific roles. Meditation and stuff like that, waiting for mana and hit points to come back, doesn't happen fast, or it happens fast, and so your downtime is really short. And like, I need a long downtime. I need a really long downtime sometimes. Sometimes that downtime lets me just kind of take a breather and just like think of or something else. Like, one of the things I never did when I was in EverQuest was take on any kind of like raid roles, because in EverQuest, specific players or specific classes could do specific things. So like, for instance, a monk. In EverQuest, a monk has the ability to feign death. And for the most part, that shit works, right? But because of it, we used it as a mechanic to allow people to pull uh, enemies, mobs, as one might call them, because I think that's a Warcraft term, to be honest, um, to an area that monk feigns death, or FDs, and then somebody else does something. And depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish, you can kind of chain monk feign death pull things. And it allows you to, let's say, go from one mob, from like 5 or 6 mobs to like one mob, and you can pull it off to where you can pull a dragon away from 30 other dragons, or minor dragons or drakes or what have you. And it allowed for a lot of a very specific type of play to occur. Um, the problem is that that's too much responsibility for me. Um, and when I first started playing, it was also pretty difficult anyway, just because of my dexterity and then my lag that I had at the time, which honestly wasn't as bad as I thought it was, because I'm still getting roughly the same kind of latency that I used to get, and I have a better internet now. I just didn't realize how okay it was. Um, it's not great. Now, when I do like a speed test, for instance, with like an independent speed test monitors, independent internet speed monitor, it's not, I don't use Ookla. Screw Ookla. That crap's annoying. Um, Also, it's like, ba- as far as I understand, and while I don't truly understand all of it, Ookla is essentially like run by the ISPs, or at the very least in cahoots with. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but because of the fact that they were effectively prioritizing those ISPs, it's not nearly as reliable as an independent speed tester. I use testmy.net. I'll even put that in here. Testmy.net. Not text. Let's go ahead and delete that message. Testmy.net. Let's get rid of this message. How do I get rid of that message? Delete that message. I just want to delete that specific message. I don't want to pin it. What the hell? How do I... See, this is ridiculous. Anyway, whatever. You would think there'd be an easier way to do it, like just right click on it and delete. Because normally if I click on this, it's like block the user, and I'm like, I don't want to block the user. I just want to delete that specific message. What the hell? Refresh, zoom in, copy, inspect, mute. That's ridiculous. Anyway. Oh well, whatever. Live and learn, I guess. Gotta sweep up a little bit here. Got some soap shavings. I don't want that to get out of hand. Having a little brush would probably help. Not necessary, but it would probably help. But yeah, so I use testmy.net for speed testing and stuff, and I get really good results for my poor people internet, because I pay $30 a month for it, and I get 100 up, 100 down, but I usually get faster than that. Not much faster, like maybe 10% faster at times. But yeah, that ADHD waiting mode thing, it tends to, and just that need to like kind of decompress, take a break, take a moment. I mean, there have been times where, so when I would play EverQuest, right, there was something known as a quake, and it was an earthquake, and it was in game, and literally the screen would shake for like 2 to 3 seconds, and when that happened, we all knew what was going on. And that meant it was raid time. Because what happens is everything resets. Every single zone, and I think it's like maybe 30 or 50 or something like that zones. But mostly what we were looking for was high-end raid targets, i.e. dragons, for the most part. Or some other non-dragons, but mostly dragons. And they drop really good stuff. And it's like, okay, I want to be able to go get a chance at getting that thing so that I can do my thing and get some good, right? So whatever we were doing, we basically stopped doing that, and then we went to go kill shit. And so we'd get up in Discord, and we would start coordinating where we'd go first. And, it's like, okay, so if we're going to go to this target first, then that means I got to get on either this specific character or this other specific character. And the reason why you get on those specific characters is because they're kind of, the targets are all spread out across the world. And if you have high enough characters, you can go fight those characters or fight those monsters. Those targets. And depending on the target, in the beginning we were like at the very, very beginning of the quake, as we called it, it was like the quake happened and then we would do all the stuff afterwards. And so that was the quake, as it was colloquially known as. We would, the first target was always the biggest priority. Usually one of the hardest, and often was associated with some of the best gear. And so it was like, okay, well, I got to remember where X character is or whatever. And then I've got to make sure that I can bring that character in somehow really quick, and move it in. And it was like, if I can't get it, if it's a quote-unquote melee character, so like a punch, stab, slash character, then they're going to have to get over there fast. So either they're already parked, as we call them, they're sitting there, or I got to get somebody to send me over there. And that wasn't always available. And so if I wasn't able to bring the melee character, I would then, hop onto a different character who was what they call bound outside of the dungeon. And it was literally you cast a spell called bind, and you can certain cast like every caster can cast it on themselves, and you can cast them at pretty much every spot in the world save for specific locations like dungeons, but you can cast it just outside of a dungeon, for instance. And so if you bind yourself there, you then also get the spell called a gate. And gate lets you cast the spell taking you to your bind spot, right? So what would happen is like on a quake, especially if you were like quicker or you were already in the area, you would start seeing people just like pop up all over the place because they were gating in. Um, so yeah, it was very frenetic the first like 10-15 minutes of a quake. And then while it was still frenetic during a good portion of it, it quickly started calming down because like the main valuable targets were already taken care of. They were already done. Um, and so like you don't have much time to breathe during those first 15 minutes. But then afterwards, it you kind of starts getting into a flow. Okay, we're going to go to this place. All right, get on whatever character, get over there however I can, etc. Um, Usually there would be people who would be on porting classes that could teleport you from one location to the next, and that usually helped out significantly, of course. Um, like playing World of Warcraft and playing the version that I'm playing, you don't even need that. I remember when I was playing because I was playing on Turtle WoW until recently, and then they got rid of it because Blizzard is ass. Oh, sure, it's their IP and everything, but I don't care. Um, Blizzard can go fuck off. But hang on a second, I'm kind of in the zone here on this one. It might be a bad idea too what I'm doing, but we'll find out. Because I'm trimming off part of his hood in the back. It doesn't need to be like a big hood or anything. It just needs to be like noticeable. Because like yeah, it looks big there, but like it doesn't have to be. I'm using this image as inspiration. I'm not trying to copy and paste it. It's probably the most work I've done on this thing in quite a while, though. Let's see. So yeah, kind of trimming the back of him off a little bit here. Lighting is just not that great. Let's pull back a little, maybe. Here, block the light. But yeah, so I'm just kind of tapering him off towards the tail because like this piece of soap was reasonably fat and all, but I gotta, I gotta whittle him down a little bit. That's what whittling is. Hopefully, I don't screw this up because I'm on my laptop because it's the only computer I have, and I was getting some particulate on the trackpad, and sometimes when I sweep across it, it like screws shit up. So, trying not to do that. And yes, I have a donation link for Ko-Fi, but click it if you want or not. Doesn't matter to me. Um, and like one might even look at me and say, "Why would you do this without the knife on the soap? Like, isn't the soap supposed to be like how you get knife practice?" And I'm like, yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna turn the AC on. It's getting a little toasty in here now. That AC is so finicky. I'll like go over there, turn it on, and then I'll walk back and it'll turn right back off. I have to like sit there and baby it just to make sure the damn thing starts to spin up and then it'll turn on. But yeah, I mean, sure, it would be a good idea for me to start with the knifing. And I did initially, but then it got to the point where I need a little bit more finer detail because this is smaller. This is a smaller medium. Significantly smaller. It's like, so he'll be potentially a little more rotund in the wooden iteration, but at the moment, not so much. Not in the soap version. And again, this is mostly just trying to like learn. This is the learning moment here. Like I spent 2 hours cutting this fucking thing in half. And if you'll notice, it's very like swirly, very spirally. And the reason that it's very spirally is because of how I had to cut into it. I couldn't just, chop it in half. And I'm using, so I'll pull out my knife here. So I'm using this little knife, right? This is my whittling knife, and I can now I have wood chips on my laptop. That's fine. Hey, little wood chip. It's funny as I actually have a brush, but I use it for my food. It's my food brush. Whoops. All right, well, whatever. But yeah, so at the moment, I'm going to continue. Whoa, talk about being blown out. Hold on. God damn. Man, I wish I could keep it like that. It's gonna look like a fucking ghost right now. But yeah, mostly I'm just trying to figure out, I think I said it earlier, just work with the medium, work with the tool, get an understanding of the thing. And then, when I start it, because I'm going to make another one, and then another one, and ideally I'll make at least 4, if not 8. Because what I'll be doing in doing so is starting to formulate how to deal with like the macro level things and then working on the micro level, the details and stuff like that. Because like right now, for instance, right, so I've got this little cavity here. Hold on. Right? Got this cavity. And I'm trying to figure out how best to make sure that, like, I want the robe to kind of slump down a little bit, just like it is, at the bottom of here, bottom of him. Create a bit of a slight rotundness to it. But then I also need to recognize that his arms are on the side of his body. They aren't just out in front of him like some weird automaton. He has shoulders, essentially. He has depth. He has a torso, just like a human does. And so the fact that the arm doesn't just stick straight out, it does, it has a little bit of additional girth. I've got to give him a bit of a top, and thus to accentuate, or to at least to showcase an understanding of that, I've got to whittle away a little bit under that. And so I've got to get rid of some of the stuff that's under those arms. And then, kind of go around the front, give him a bit of a belly, but it doesn't have to be, like a gut or anything. It just has to be something that is belly-esque. But then I'm cutting onto it, and I'm going to be like, okay, so he's also got feet. Now his feet in this image look as though they are about as wide as his shoulders, maybe a little wider. But this is just an accentuated version as well. Um, I mean, honestly, this kind of looks better, but it also feels like it's missing something too. Um, like I need to go in a little bit more on the gut area, and then have that essentially go all the way to the back. This is my thinking anyway. I could be wrong. And maybe I'll make a shit ton of mistakes in doing this, and the next one I'll have a better idea. That's also why I'm doing it with this and not with the wood. Because in the end, I want to carve out a wooden Tonberry. But in the process of going to the rear, I also don't have to gouge as much. But I also have to look at the back of it and be like, oh, okay, I need to get rid of more material. Because again, he's still pretty kind of fat on one side. And so I'm like, all right, well, we need to fix that. Um, and so I'm kind of constantly going back and forth, checking my work, so to speak. And it helps that this tool has this sort of like rounded nose arrow tip going on. So I know I'm not using it for its original purpose, but I don't care. But also because of the fact that as I continue to cut in, I'm also cutting into his, like, I'm creating a pit here where his arm would be, sort of an arm pit, if you will. Um, I have to recognize what that's doing to his robe and how that might affect the nature of the robe. And hell, who knows? Maybe in the process I accidentally break his fucking head off. Because I cut his head too early. It was one of the first things I made. But that's kind of the point, is like the whole idea is I got to do something to it, otherwise nothing gets done. So one thing I can do is like what I'm doing right now, which is I'm looking at it tail on, and I'm kind of like scraping along the side. But I also recognize this could get a little bit hairy too. So I can't just stay at that angle. I've got to come back around, trim some stuff down, smooth things out. And like I said before, he's going to be like he's supposed to be sort of stabbing outward. Now the problem is that both of his arm, if you'll notice from here, so like we have the knife here, and then there's the lantern here. Well, like both of his sleeves are out at roughly the same distance. So it doesn't appear as if he's reaching out. So I don't know how I'll deal with that. I might have to just be like, okay, maybe he's not. I don't know. Maybe he's in the process of it or something. I'm not sure. And then, I've got to have it to where the material kind of clumps on top of his feet. But then, not so much that it looks unsightly or anything. Oh, and now I have a hole. I don't know if you can see that. Very tiny hole there now. Probably going to have to like put a pause on that for the time being, at least. Because if I go further, then I might, endanger the existence of the lamp. I might end up breaking it off because I did break off part of his knife. I originally had like where the thickness. Let's maybe get some lighting in here. So like right here was where I had his hand, and the knife came out to about where the tip of this bad boy is now. And then it broke off, and I was like, oh, well, shit. Whoops. But then I was like, whatever, it works. It's fine. I'll just work with it. And then and part of the reasoning that happened was because I was like, well, I just want to see what happens. I want to get somewhere with it. I want to see what, if anything, that can be accomplished. Take risks as needed. And the cool thing is about the nature of this methodology is that with the material of the soap, it lends itself to kind of being kind of lumpy, and because it's lumpy, it kind of works with the material of what the character is wearing. It's like Tonberries generally are wearing something that is oversized. You know, I don't know what their culture is or whatever that causes them to be to use burlap sack so much, or something that is akin to a burlap sack. Um, but it kind of has that burlap sack nature to it. And it works with the nature of the soap. And I can tell you that from my experiment, my current experiments, rather, experiences of working with the wood, I'm gonna get some reasonable detailing that are like lumpy as well, because I'm not gonna be sanding anything. That's one of the things. Like I live in an apartment, and I don't want to make too much of a mess. So I've got this big cardboard box that's under my desk right now, and it's going to be my wood shavings collector. So one of the things that I've got to contend with here is also like how I'm going to deal with how the robe falls onto his tail. Like from here, it looks like it just kind of falls off, which okay, whatever. Um, but gravity's a little bit more finicky than that. Unless the material is really lightweight. And so I'm kind of creating a slightly wider groove at the base of his tail. But I also have to round it off relatively well, the potential you know um, coat material. But I can't make it super sharp like a blade either. It's like it's all of these little details that you have to think about. But I don't really think about them until the time comes to start working with it, and then I got to round that off a little bit because I don't want it like being too pointed looking. And it's because it's like sure it can fold and whatnot and look as though it has little points here and there, but let's not worry about that right now. Let's just worry about like looking a little bit more like what we expect it to before we start giving it too much character. You know? So I'm just like still getting a little bit of the macro shavings off of here. Trying to even out this slump that goes onto his feet. And then whenever, like, so, okay, you should be able to see it. You'll notice there's kind of a bit of a gouge there that goes all the way up there. When I get a little too deep like that, I gotta like come back in and then, essentially scrape up and down to smooth that out. Because if I just keep going, then I get a little too much. I don't want to do that. And the cool thing is like the tip works really well if, like, let's say I go in circles, I can get, I can get some like smaller areas with decent amounts of material removal. And then when I'm done doing those little circles, then I can, rotate it and use the flat. And then you can see that little shit, there. And then I can kind of do a similar, rounded thing, but with the flat, and then it, smooths it out a bit more, evens it out, and then now I have like a better idea of what that's going to look like here. And so I need to, when it comes to his arm here, I've got to figure out like a point where it has to cut off. But then I also have, so it's like, I also have to incorporate his cloak as well. So I've added these little grooves to kind of showcase like the divots, where kind of like little humps. And so I've got to figure out how best to then create the part where, behind the shoulders, essentially. I got to figure out where to put his shoulders without taking away too much away from the cloak. So that's something I've got to contend with as well. And I know I don't have a whole lot of material here to work with. And I might screw it up. I might not. I don't know. We'll see. Because I want both of them to be distinguishable from the other. So here what I'm thinking is that, okay, so I'll show you here if you can see it. I've added a tiny little groove there that's going up. Okay, so my thinking is that I kind of cut into the material a little bit, right? And then kind of round it. So it's like, okay, that's his shoulder. We go down towards that this bigger groove here. So I've got the little groove and then it goes into the bigger groove. And then I can kind of blend those at the base, but then also behind it, kind of cut out that triangle. And this is just a guess, and hopefully it works, because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Looks like it's doing well. Let's see here. Obviously, I'm still gonna have to do something with that groove on both the shoulder. It's like I think that groove has to go a little deeper to give me some more definition. But then I can't keep the groove, right? So what I got to do is I've got to sort of trim off a little bit of the top of the hood. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm just taking guesses here. Right? Okay. And then sort of round off the shoulder a bit because it's got too much definition. This would be where if like I had sandpaper, I'd want to use that on a piece of wood. looks like it could work. Like, I'm no artist, but I have a general understanding of how things be. And I'm sure that helps. So this has a little too much girth. The side of the hood has a little just too much to it. But I've also created like a little bit of that divot, divide, because the divide needs to be there. And this is also kind of the part of the creative process that I've never found myself to be in. Like, I'm kind of in the zone now, which is kind of cool. So like now I'm finding myself wanting to produce more detail for the bottom of the hood to kind of give it that, hey, I'm the bottom of the hood feel. So I already have those initial grooves that were put in there. Okay. I can't cut off too much of that because then it starts to look like he's like the hood isn't really connected to the body of the material. So then I've got to make the arm look like it stands out. He's got to have something that looks akin to a neck. Let's see here. Getting somewhere here. I don't know if this is where I want to be, but it's something. So it looks like his arm's kind of disconnected at the moment, which I can fix that. I just got to bring it down here. Sort of smooth things out a little bit here. I mean, his arm isn't, exactly what I want it to be at the moment, but I'm also not done with that detail. And this isn't supposed to be an ultra detailed version. This is, again, just a starter. This is just the beginning. Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible, but I've got a little bit of distinction between his arm and the hood. I got to figure out a way to sort of reconnect the hood to the top of his cloak, because like the hood be back here, and it's got to have some kind of material that connects with the collar. That's the word I was looking for. And that might be a little difficult to do considering where he's at, but they don't have the opportunity to do the other side, because like right here on the other side it looks fine. And with him stretched out like that, it kind of works. But at the same time, it also doesn't really work. It's just kind of blurred together. And you can't see the hood. And so it's like, all right, well, we'll have to figure that part out too. I guess I could start on that. Okay. And then, kind of create that definition for the arm. And then sort of. So, like, okay. Let's see if I can showcase this. So I don't know if you can see this, right? But right there, there's material that I got to get rid of. It's a little triangle, basically. Because that will help create definition for both. And I got to do it at the top, too. For both the hood and the shoulder. So that they look like those things. Instead of just being some weird pink amorphous blob. Oh, it's been an hour. All right. Well, I think at this point then I'm going to go ahead and call it. Give myself an opportunity to just kind of breathe, think about it, come back to it at another time. But, you know, we're looking pretty good right now. I mean, it looks like a Tonberry. He's not as detailed as I'd like him to be, but he looks very much like a Tonberry. And that's where I want to be. At minimum. At minimum. I want him to look like he's supposed to look. You know? All right. Well, that's that for that. Words? Have fun.